Okay, welcome back to NDTV's big coverage of Union Budget 2022, which just wrapped up a short while ago, just a few moments ago. Nirmala Sitharaman completing her fourth budget speech. This was a speech which was actually shorter than the previous durations of her speeches, where she's often even crossed 90 minutes, 2 hours. This time it was just about, she started at 11 in the morning, dot on time, and finished just about at 12:30. So it was a brief speech compared to some of her earlier speeches, and given the context of the pandemic, given the context of the elections, there was quite a lot to unpack here. Let's look at the main takeaways from the speech so far, and of course we're going to now analyze it over the next several hours. But the big takeaways from the speech, one of them is of course the fact that there has been a national Gati Shakti, the PM Gati Shakti. She said that is the 7 engines on which this budget is based, which includes roads, railways, IT, water, social infrastructure, and so on. And that, she says, is going to create 60 lakhs jobs over the next 25 years. That's 2.4 lakh jobs a year. Didn't specify whether these are government jobs or private sector jobs. Also 400 Vande Bharat trains and 100 cargo new terminals in the next 3 years as well, including increased outlays for water in every particular household. Now, the big announcements in this budget. One is that the government has boosted its total expenditure. What is called capital expenditure by the government has been boosted. That has now gone up to almost 39 lakh crores is the boost in the amount that the government is going to be spending. And also the revenue the government is going to be earning projected is almost 24 lakh crores. So that's one of the big headlines about the enhanced government spending that is going to happen in this budget. Also the fiscal deficit she has announced in the budget. She says the fiscal deficit for the previous year has been revised from 6.8% to 6.9%. So she's acknowledged that we have breached last year's cap, which is perhaps understandable given the fact that there was extra expenses during the pandemic year. And for the coming financial year, she says it is at 6.4%. So it's coming down from 6.9 to 6.4%. The other big announcement, or the lack of the announcement, is of course on taxes, with the government or the finance minister not at all announcing anything to do with income tax. So it appears for the moment that the tax slabs remain unchanged, though of course once the budget documents are published there will be more clarity on that. The other big headline though as far as taxes is concerned is that the government has put a 30% tax on digital assets. So number one, the government says that they will come up with their own digital currency. On the other hand, a 30% tax on digital assets, virtual digital assets. Any transfer of such assets will be taxed at 30%. Big question, of course, everyone is asking is, does this include or does this mean cryptocurrency as well? So these are all the big announcements coming from the budget 2022, and of course we'll keep bringing you more details as and when we continue to dive into our programming. Let's just start getting you first reactions on the speech. Let's go straight across to Sachit Jolly. He's a corporate lawyer, a tax expert. Thanks very much indeed, Sachit. Good to have you on moments after the speech. Sachit, first comments from you. Number one, no reference to taxation. Does that mean that tax slabs have not been changed just like last year? And number two, this big 30% tax on digital assets, what does it mean?
Vasu, to your first point, when the finance minister doesn't speak anything on taxes, that means there is a devil in the detail. If you remember when the Vodafone retrospective amendment came, the finance minister never said anything in the budget speech. So I think that really doesn't matter. We'll have to look at the details and see what happens. But on the crypto tax, it appears that the legislature and the government has brought in a special classification called virtual or digital assets, and that will cover cryptocurrencies, which have been taxed at 30%, no set off for losses, no expenditure deduction against it. That means you have a 30% flat tax. There's a TDS at 1%. I don't know how that will work out in terms of whether you'll get credit or not. All this will have to be seen. But you rightly pointed out there seems to be a dichotomy in the budget that on one hand you want to introduce your own currency, but then create a separate class of currency and call them crypto assets. I mean, it's difficult to fathom what is the direction of the budget on that in this regard then.
Okay. But is it safe to say, because a lot of our viewers would be tuning in just now, Sachit, so just two important things you said. One is you said that as far as taxation goes, particularly income tax, personal taxation, don't draw any assumptions yet, because there could be, as you said, the detail in the budget papers, that there actually may be some changes to the tax slabs which we don't know about. But the other is on this taxing of digital assets, you're saying that it could mean cryptocurrency. It's not just things like NFTs and so on.
Well, I think the word used by the finance minister was blockchain at some point of time. And I would believe that when they say crypto assets, or sorry, they said virtual/digital assets, they would, in my view, include crypto assets as well. So it appears that they want to tax it at a flat 30% to discourage non-government rupee, which they are going to introduce through RBI, while the digital rupee will be treated as currency and can never be treated as an asset. So I think they'll create two distinct classes in the budget now, as it appears.
Okay, and very quickly, this is what do you make of it though, as a move? Because there was a speculation that there could even be a ban on cryptocurrencies if indeed digital assets includes cryptocurrencies. The fact that instead of banning them, they've decided to allow them, but with quite a hefty tax. Good thing, bad thing?
Well, this is one way of discouraging it. They tried to ban it. The Supreme Court quashed the ban by the RBI. So I don't know how the budget would have brought in an amendment. Maybe they could have. But I think they've tried to discourage it by imposing a 30% flat rate without any allowance for expenditure and set off for loss, while they'll incentivize the use of the digital rupee, which will be issued by RBI. So I think instead of showing a license Raj or a banning technique, I think the government has shown that you can discourage the use of crypto by putting such a heavy tax. And I don't know what has happened on the GST front, whether there was some debate on whether the crypto exchanges will have to suffer a 18% GST on the gross value of transaction.
Right.
Now, if that works in tandem with a 30% tax, anyways, these guys they won't survive.
Okay, they won't survive. Sachit, stay with us. We will come back to you in a second. Let me just also go across to my colleague Sanket Upadhyay, who's also been tracking this budget. Sanket, good to have you on. Now, let's just talk big picture first, Sanket, because we've been kind of positioning this as has been, all the other channels and media, that this is a kind of election time budget. This is going to keep an eye on the fact that we are in, election season. But if you really look at it, what do you think would be the big political takeaways from this? Because if one really drills down, it doesn't seem to offer that kind of big bang political dhamaka announcements, whether it has to do with welfare schemes or otherwise, or even packages designed for some of the poll-bound states. Seems to be a whole lot of other measures on infrastructure, tinkering here, there, some more allotment to government schemes. But the political or the election factor, you think, missing?
Well, Vasu, it's very difficult to call this, while one did assume that there will be something related to the elections and there'll be a political controversy, and then Vasu and Sanket will have a field day discussing it. But the point is that usually it is in the railway budget that one sees that there are special trains in poll-bound states. That is an announcement that did not happen, or schemes specifically for election-bound states like Uttar Pradesh. That also one cannot see as a key highlight over here. So linking this directly to the elections may not be prudent. But there will be some key markers which will be discussed politically. Number one, as you've been discussing also with our experts, is a clear division between a currency, a digital currency, and a digital asset. I think there was this huge confusion for more than a year in our understanding of what is a digital currency and what is a digital asset. And I think that demarcation has been made while we are getting in a cryptocurrency in the form of a digital rupee, which has been announced. We are also taxing digital assets. Now, any form of cryptocurrency which is in exchange in various digital exchanges, the transfer of it will be taxed. Possessing it will not be taxed, but if you transfer it and make a profit out of it, 30% is the taxation. So to bring it under the tax regime, I think will have an immediate and instant impact on millennials and many people dealing with this new monster which the government was trying to figure out, initially banning it and also calling it a sort of a Ponzi scheme. But the government has realized that if this is a necessity, then we might as well tax it. So it'll be interesting to see how the industry is going to look at it over the next few hours. We'll have a lot of industry experts affiliated to the CII where we'll discuss this aspect and also the massive increase and the humongous increase in the capital expenditure. I feel this also needs to be decoded politically also.
Yes, I'll just come to the capex in a second, Sanket, but also Sanket, interesting silence on taxation as such. Last budget also there was no change in the tax slabs. The finance minister simply didn't refer to it, and so it was assumed there was no change, and subsequently it turned out there was no change. This time again, complete silence on taxation, income tax, personal tax. We'll have to wait, as Sachit Jolly said, for the devil in the detail. But as of now, is it safe to assume that once again taxation has not been touched?
Yes, at least if you look at this budget, we heard the budget, we consulted people also because, you know, budget is usually very technical stuff. Some of the things also fly above your head. But as far as taxation is concerned, direct taxes are concerned, as of this moment in this speech, one cannot make out whether there has been any increase. Now, to this extent, maybe, Vasu, you can call this, you know, a sort of a pre-election move, because any increase in direct taxation would have meant, you know, some amount of irritation ahead of the budget. So that has not happened. But again, as you very rightly said, we'll have to wait for the details of this budget to be able to figure out what has actually happened.
Interesting. So a kind of conservative approach didn't increase taxes because, as you said, that would be politically problematic, but didn't also give relief, which could have given political gain. But then obviously that hits your revenues. So a decision to just maintain status quo, it appears, again, lots of caveats because we still have to wait for the detail. Sanket, Nikhil Dey is with us, of course, MKSS. He's someone who's been working in the grassroots, is joining us. Thanks very much indeed, Nikhil, for being on. Just your first reaction to the budget, particularly in terms of what you're seeing in terms of money that has been allotted or not allotted to social schemes, to welfare schemes, farmers and so on. Yes, Nikhil, go ahead. Nikhil, can you hear us?
So sorry. So actually the details, even for all of us, need a little bit of time to unravel and look at. Some of the things that we were hoping for, clearly in terms of primarily an urban employment guarantee scheme, there's been no such announcement, which we were hoping would be something that would be very important. We had very clear figures that of what we need in terms of Narega, because last year there was about a 30% cut in the budget from the previous year, from 2021, and that's resulted in a lot of pain through this year for Narega workers. And therefore, we have very clear figures of what is needed, but actually we have to wait for part of this to be uploaded. Pensions, for instance, social security pensions, welfare scheme, that's very important. 15 years, there's been no increase at all. And we have to look at those figures. So I am also trying to look through to see, because apart from the larger, what the government considers big picture announcements, the others are still to be figured out. If you get them, I can immediately, of course, also make it clear to you what we see vis-a-vis what our expectations were, because our expectations are clear. But there are 3 or 4 things. I think the sectors that we are looking at is obviously agriculture, and agriculture has a lot to do with food security, Vasu, because it's those 90 million tons of food grain that come through procurement that actually enables people to get rations, and the Pradhan Mantri Gram Kalyan Yojana is done through the fact that there's so much food grain available. We are looking very hard at Narega and Foreign Urban Employment Guarantee, whether it's there. We are looking at education, which took a 10% cut last year in the education budget, and we know that there's a whole generation that's being lost because everyone is relying just on online education, and the rural poor can't do any online education, and they need resources for that. We are looking at social security schemes in the sense of the social security budget was also cut as a percentage of GDP almost by half. And social security pensions have not been even indexed to inflation. They are 200 and 300 rupees per month for the elderly and for disabled and for widows from the central government, and it's a centrally sponsored scheme. So every year for the last 10 years, we've been looking at that, and that has not increased. We don't know exactly where it lies. So these are the 6 or 7 very important areas which we are looking at. And I will also, as soon as I get the figures, or either you or Sanket, if you can give us an idea, because these have not been the big announcements.
Still in the process, Mr. Day, still in the process of getting more of this information on the budget. We have started getting some key highlights and also what we heard from the speech. But as you're rightly mentioning, and many people are rightly mentioning, it's the detail that we are awaiting. But political opinion has started coming in.
So one thing that's been considered very controversial vis-a-vis all of us and our demands, we've been saying there needs to be a wealth tax, and we've been saying where will resources come for all these social security programs. We've been saying there needs to be a wealth tax, and there needs to be an estate duty, an inheritance tax. And a group of 30 organizations called Jan Sarokar of all the major social movements have suggested that there be a 1%, 2% wealth tax.
Do you know, Mr. Day, it's also important, while you focus on how these welfare schemes are going to be funded and what is the plan that the government has in this budget, one is really interested on how much is the outlay for health and education. Of course, there was stress that one saw in the speech, but in terms of allocation in the budget, in terms of percentage, that has been a sore point and a pain point in this country. So one will really have to look at the details as to what percentage share of the GDP has gone to health as well as education. But you know, Mr. Jolly, one political comment that has come in, and maybe you can build on that and may give us a sort of a economic argument, is Mr. Shashi Tharoor saying that this is a disappointing budget. Achhe din pushed even further away, no relief to the middle class. According to you, what is there for the middle class in this budget, from what you could understand?
If to people who have children with disability, nothing more that I could hear for the middle class. We were hearing some murmurs that there may be an increase on the standard deduction by about 30%. We also heard some relief on the home loan front, but nothing of that we've heard in the speech. If it comes in the finance bill, well, happy days are here, but nothing as of now that we've heard which will give any joy to the middle class. On a lighter note, my wife was overjoyed that she heard some rebate on the customs duty on diamonds. Apart from that, I really don't think anything. I heard anything on that.
Okay. Well, Sachet, you know where you will have to go after you finish this live with us. You have to straight away go to the nearest Titan store. But Sunil Prabhu is with us. Sunil Prabhu, what are the first reactions that you're hearing and seeing from Parliament? Because as we were just talking with Sanket earlier, many believe this was going to be an election time budget, with some schemes or announcements designed at the elections, but that doesn't seem to have happened. It very much seems to be a status quo kind of speech.
That's right. I mean, of course, the most important point came from the Congress, which is Mr. Randeep Surjewala, who is the official spokesperson for the Congress party, saying it's disappointing for the middle class. If you note, the finance minister has kept it completely not touched the direct budget taxation levels, kept it at the same limit. So for those who were expecting some kind of relief, especially when the fact that many people have suffered during the pandemic, there has been really no response. So that's been the first political comment. If you remember, Srinivasan, I've been reflecting about digital currency for a few days when the cryptocurrency bill was coming about. Now that RBI Act, even yesterday, I reflected on air that I'll be very, very surprised if that digital currency does not get reflected in the budget speech. That has now finally been unveiled. The RBI Act will be amended along with the budget, and that is how that whole process will be set off to be starting from April next year. I mean this year, I'm sorry.
Okay. Thank you very much, Sunil Prabhu, for joining us. And just building on from where you left, digital currency, Dr. Aruna Sharma, former member of the RBI Digitization Committee, can't think of anyone better than Dr. Aruna Sharma to be able to answer this question. Do you think, Dr. Sharma, that this is, before getting a bill on crypto assets and cryptocurrency, a clarity of thought in the government's mind on what it expects? We have seen a digi-currency or a e-rupee being spoken about for a very long time. Finally, a budget announcement of a digital rupee. I want to ask you, Dr. Sharma, how is a digital rupee going to be different from a normal rupee? And how do you see its utility in India using blockchain technology?
Because, today what has been announced is an amendment in the RBI Act, which enables them to go for the digital currency, which is going to be completely different from the Crypto Asset Act, which will be coming in due course. So when you are talking of digital currency of RBI, it will take a year or so, because India is way ahead on the digital payment. And the printing of currency has anyway considerably will come down, more and more digital payments come, but then it will be a massive reduction, and maybe we will reduce ourselves to only smaller denomination notes, which will be available in the market. Because today RBI is battling with 26 to 29 lakh crores of cash currency, that is the print currency floating in the market. So this will be curtailing. Second, the international trade the exchanges will become much more easy the moment you go for this digital currency. And third, most important is that there will be a digital footprint of every transaction that will happen. So these are the major gains, but it is an evolving process. So by the time it gets floated in the market, it is going to take a year or so.
But just a quick question, Srinivasan here, Ms. Sharma, just a direct question. This 30% tax on digital assets, does that cover cryptocurrencies as well?
See, the crypto has not yet been defined whether it is going to be a crypto asset. And this 30% tax, what you are talking about, is something the moment you define what you mean by the gain, what you mean by asset, because as you do in the securities, it's only when you sell the security, and if there is a gain, it is taxable. So something like that will have to happen. The transaction is not taxed, but the moment you encash it, it should get taxed, ideally. Similarly, when you work upon the exchange, tax on the exchanges, still it requires a lot of clarity, as their income is to be taxed, not the transaction. So, and the indirect tax GST also needs a lot of clarification as you move ahead. But having said that, when you are talking about the digital payment, I'm very upset with the SBI announcing that there will be a taxation on your IMPS transaction. See, the whole efforts were to incentivize the digital payments. This will again disincentivize it if we start taxing at every stage of the transaction. And if it falls on the customers, then it is going to be a real problem as you move ahead on that issue. So that is something which is worrisome, that if on one breath, if we are thinking to go for a digital payment ecosystem, then on other hand, there should be not a small step which is going to disincentivize it.
Dr. Sharma, if I may, just quickly circling back to the question on our digital rupee or digital currency. You were mentioning that this remarkable shift, in payment with the advent of UPI and many of these apps. I mean, it's remarkable the penetration, how it has been in this country. You can go without your wallet out to the market and still carry out with payments. How can a transfer to a digital rupee be any different or advantageous than the present system which is in place?
Well, it is not going to affect the way you transact, but it is going to affect the way the banks function, right? So the impact is going to be more and more on the bank, because your payment mode is going to be the digital payment, which all of you have adapted across and penetrated quite well, and it is going in geometrical proportions. But the moment you come to a digital rupee, the banking system is going to change. The physical bank presences are going to change. The way the bank maintain their accounts and everything is going to change. So there is going to be a major change, because China, which was the first one to go for a digital currency, is still struggling into for putting it in completely into a system. So it is going to be a time consuming, because many of these things will have to be ironed out. Okay.
We also have, Sanket, with us Ranbir Singh Pathania. He's with the BJP, and also Sumant Sinha, Chairman and CEO of Renew Power, who's in the renewable energy space. Let me just come across to you first, Mr. Pathania. Mr. Pathania, already we are starting to see the reactions from the Congress saying this is a disappointing budget. There is nothing for the middle class. In fact, it's hard to gauge for which section there is any kind of announcement. Would you agree that the finance minister seems to have taken a very status quoist, don't tamper or tinker with anything approach in the budget?
Sir, let me respond to your first leg of your query. What the Congress has said, this budget addresses the needs and the aspirations of women, the aspirations of children, the aspirations of startups, and because it personally pivots around the agriculture-related demands, the middle-class-related demands, that's why it is disappointing for the Congress. This budget is disappointing for the Congress, but this budget is a welcome step for the people of India. This is a budget which is innovative, which is the first digital budget, which is oriented at the growth, which is fintech enabled, which is climate enabled, which is technology enabled, and on cryptocurrencies also, because there was no consensus on it in the parliament.
What is the Pathania sir, one second. Sir, we don't want jargon specifically.
Please.
No, I'm saying, forget the technical terms. It's this enabled. In concrete terms, sir, what is the big benefit from this budget for either women or farmers or the middle class?
Yes, sir. What they have announced, we could say Operation Shakti, the Operation Vatsalya, the operation we could say Saksham. This focuses on women and children. For startups, the initial for angel investors, the tax has been reduced from 28% to 25%. That's why it encourages startups also. For agriculture also, it focuses on setting IPOs also. So my point is that it focuses on agriculture, it focuses on growth, it focuses on women, it focuses on children. And the new innovative step that we can now file updated income tax returns for a period of, the period has been reduced to 2 years also, sir. So this welcomes the middle class also. Let us go into all the facts and figures. She has just concluded her speech. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has just concluded her speech. This is a budget which focuses on a new growth trajectory, which India seeks to undertake upon under the dynamic leadership of Pradhan Mantri Narendra Modi ji.
Mr. Pathania, what are those 4 or 5 things that you feel are going to propel India to growth, or it is going to, capitalize on the fact that now this is a post-vaccination budget? You see, it's very important to lay stress on this fact. What are those 4 or 5 things in this budget that you see which can really help capitalize from here on?
Sir, just proceeding to the budget, we could say the aggressive vaccination which India has carried on, and which this budget focuses on propping up the health infrastructures also. It will facilitate in creating a sentiment. It will facilitate in creating a demand. Once the pandemic is over, the demand will exceed. We could say the supply chains, the blocked supply chains will also get lubricated, and this will ultimately give a push for putting more money.
But Hanya ji, if I may,
people will spend more.
Can you tell us what is the percentage spend with respect to our GDP on health? Because, you know, there has been a demand that it should be around 3%, at least 3% in a country like India, if we want to achieve anything. I mean, ideally 6, but 3% at least. We are nowhere close to that figure.
This is what I am submitting, sir. Free vaccination to all, increased health infrastructure, once safety is there. Once COVID pandemic is under the, we could say, carpet, and it will increase the sentiment, it will increase the consumption, it will lubricate the supply chains, and ultimately demand will increase. And once demand increases, supply chains will also increase, and it will lead to a push. It will end the liquidity, it will end uncertainty, and ultimately the economy will grow.
The fact, Sanket, is the dilemma here for Pathania Saab and likely for the other panelists as well, is that a lot of these numbers have not been actually read out or mentioned in the speech.
That's the biggest thing.
No, hold on, Mr. Pathania, one second. Normally, one second, Mr. Pathania. Normally, you're supposed to cite numbers, but there has been no numbers cited for education, for health, for Narega, for a lot of crucial heads. We'll have to actually go into the budget papers. But let's just bring in Sumant Sinha with us, and also Amitabh Dubey of the Congress is joining us. Sumant Sinha, your big picture takeaway from this budget, we're just talking in the run-up to it. We are still trying to see what is a big headline or what's a big ticket announcement from this budget. Do you see that, or do you see this as a kind of status quo, a little bit tinkering here and there, but largely no big changes in taxes, no big ticket, big bang announcement?
Was that the FM does not actually tinker around too much, because things are by and large heading in the right direction at this point in time. Demand is growing, the economy is picking up, good wicket right now, 9% last year, hopefully 8% in the year to come. Things are going reasonably well. We didn't really require anything very fundamental. Now, having said that, what the FM has announced is a fairly significant increase in capex expenditure, which I think is something that we are discounting. It actually increases the productive capacity of the economy and the productivity itself. So I think that is a very big thing. 35% increase in capex for infrastructure development, I think, is a huge increase. That is one. The second thing is she's also talked about giving a massive increase of credit to the states by almost 1 lakh crores, which was only 10 to 15,000 crores in the year prior. And we know that a lot of the spending needs to happen at the state level. So I think that hopefully also puts more ability of the states to do things. Then I think 2 other areas that she's focused on is, number one, is digital. There are lots of announcements for digital, although I'm not that familiar with the whole digital space, so I can't comment too deeply. But certainly on the climate front, there has been a lot of statements that have been made. First of all, of course, the PLI has been increased. Batteries have been made part of the infrastructure sector. There's battery swapping. There's a lot of things around that. Energy efficiency. Discom reforms were given a bit of a leg up as far as states' ability to deal with that. So I think quite a lot of things in that area. And then on defense, I think as well, there's a fairly significant push for Atmanirbharta in the defense side as well. And I think on tax, by and large, she's maintained consistency, which, as we all know, is critical. We can't keep tinkering and changing with tax issues all the time. Keep in mind also that GST is going up dramatically. She talked about the fact that January was 1,40,000 crores. So I think on the tax side, there's a lot of buoyancy, which gives her actually a lot of flexibility to also therefore bring down the fiscal deficit from 6.9 to 6.4, which I think is very practical and pragmatic. It's not shooting for too deep a reduction, and at the same time giving enough room in the hands of the government to keep spending and that there is that stimulation in the economy.
Okay.
Yes, Vasu, there is a document which has been shared by our colleague Himanshu Shekhar Mishra, which gives you the budget estimates for 2022-23. And this is very, very interesting. While the pension has gone up in crore rupees to 2,07,132. Defense budget, as was mentioned by Mr. Sinha, has gone up to 3,85,370 crores.
But we have to
It's
see
the
gone up from where?
subsidies which seem to have gone up when you compare it to the revised estimates of 21-22.
Right.
So in terms of percentage, there is a marginal increase. But you know, the subsidy on fertilizer has actually gone down from 1,40,000 to 1,05,000. That on food has gone down from 2,86,000 to 2,06,000. So, and also on petroleum from 6,517 crores to 5,813. This is just a very preliminary study of the budgetary estimates that have come in as of this moment. So subsidies have gone down. I don't know how this is going to be taken politically, because a very sharp political commentary has already come from the Congress party. It has come from the Trinamool Congress, which feels that the government is only interested in diamonds and does not care for the rest. I think some political battling will have to be done, apart from a micro-analysis of where the spend has gone.
Right.
A decline in subsidies is definitely going to, I see this in an election season, going to become very, very politically potent.
Interesting. We'll have to have a look at those subsidy numbers particularly closely. But let's also just go across now to Sangeeta Reddy is joining us, Joint Managing Director, Apollo Hospitals. Sangeeta Reddy, thank you for being on. Let's just again first get your big picture comments on this budget, which, as I said, because there's so much of a silence around a lot of the numbers in terms of allotments, like with healthcare, we don't even know what the figure is. We're still going through the papers. What would you make of this? This is again a kind of status quo, is don't change too much sort of budget, or is there anything in it that sprang out at you?
So clearly, I think I won't call it status quo so much as policy stability and consistency of tax regime, extension of benefits. And this is something that everybody's been asking for, saying enable us to see a consistency and policy stability. I was particularly, positively struck by the enhanced capital expenditure. And that outlay, was a clear recognition of the fact that, corporate consumer demand has to come up. Current manufacturing utilization is still at 60-65%. So only enhanced government spend can enhance consumption. With consumption will then come in production, and from production will come expenditure from the capital sector. So I think the FM very rightly said we have to pump prime the private investment by continuing to put capital investment from the government. I thought that was a very good move, and 35% enhancement in infrastructure spend was a good one. The focus on environment and digital, on jobs and ensuring that employment is an area and a thing. The other one I really liked was the call out on trust. There's an underlying kind of a theme of trust, which I thought was very good. So overall, a progressive budget. Like you rightly said, we're waiting to see the number on the healthcare. My hope is that the allocation which was made last year was a fairly significant jump in the health budget, taking it to about 2.1% of GDP, if you include the vaccine outlay and the COVID expenditure. My hope is that Reddy now gets baked into the normal budget for health.
Dr. Reddy, so I have the numbers. I can share them with you. The numbers are here.
Yes, Sanket, please
the budget
tell me.
Estimates for 21-22 for health, that is last year, was 74,602 crores, and then in the revised estimates it became 85,915. This time around, it has actually increased, but marginally, to 86,606. Now, obviously, these are budget estimates. As we go along, we could have a revised estimate also. And Vasu, very interestingly, even in education, and this should be very interesting, the education budget estimate this time around is 1,04,278, up from 88,002 crores last year, which was the revised. The revised estimate for education had actually gone down. This is very interesting data.
Right. Sanket, I think just it'll be good if you just read out the health numbers again, because because of the focus on the pandemic, because the increase seems very, very marginal. So Yeah, you were saying it's...
Yes,
But
very
if you
marginal.
look-
So the budget estimates for the actual spend, I'll read it out. It's all right here in this document.
Yes,
the
yes.
actual spend in 2020-2021
Yes.
on health was 80,026 crores.
Right.
Then the budget estimates for 21-22 in the budget was 74,602.
Right.
Which was then increased and revised to 85,915. And now the budget estimate is 86,606 crores. That's the budget estimate.
Okay, that's... Okay, so just to understand that, that's a
so
very...
there is an increase, and
There's
that's
a
why I
very
said it
small
wasn't
increase.
called out, but we're waiting to see the fine print. And if you look at the enhancement over the earlier year, I think we have some room to work with. And then in addition to that, I think the digital has really been one of the large themes which was called out, which will be good. An acknowledgement of a much neglected area of mental health was also called out. So let's wait to see and focus on implementation of all the good things which are there.
But Dr. Reddy, are you happy with this allocation? Because this does not seem to be a
allocation per se
significant
is
jump.
still there's so much to be done in healthcare, so we would always look for more. But I think that seeing that last year we got a significant uptick, if it goes up even slightly on that, we're still in a positive. And I think the overall target of being 2.5% of GDP can be reached over the next 2 years. That was the target, to get there by 2025. So I think that's good. The one thing which I would have liked to have seen is an enhanced personal tax reduction towards insurance spending.
Okay.
That was one thing that we asked for, and I think we will continue to look for that even if it's not in the budget. But besides that, I think overall a good budget which has stayed consistent.
Okay,
Thank you.
consistent budget. If you can stay with us, Sangeeta Reddy, unless you need to go, but because we want to come back to you. But we just want to go across to Amitabh Dubey. Congress party is with us. Amitabh Dubey, what do you make of these initial reactions? I know the Congress initial reactions seem a bit critical, but we've had corporate voices saying the economy is doing fine. It doesn't require too much tinkering. The government has stepped up what is called capital expenditure, which is the amount the government spends on new projects and so on. So overall, it's a good budget.
So Vasu, in the pre-budget discussion we had with you, I had mentioned that we are facing a critical employment crisis, and we are facing serious constraints on the demand side. If you look at the budget, as with previous budgets, this is a very supply-side focused budget. So you've had tax cuts, you've had ease of doing business, you've had all the measures that we see in the budget today, and it really hasn't translated into investment because corporates are not investing despite all the things that have been shouted at them because there's no demand. So why would they invest? We were discussing health just now. I looked at the budget, and if you look at the Department of Health and Family Welfare, the revised budget for the previous year and the projections for coming year, it's actually flat at 83,000 crores. Now, health, obviously, we've had a health crisis. Health is one area where you can do a lot of employment generation. There's a lot of doctors, there's a lot of nursing staff, there's a lot of PHCs, CHCs, there's a whole infrastructure. And last year, the government had announced the Atmanirbhar Swasthya Bharat Yojana, or some very ambitious scheme with huge outlays. But if you look at the actual spending, it really isn't all that much. So once again, I feel that while the government is going for broke on the capex front, we have to see how much of it actually gets implemented. On the demand side, on the issues that are confronting the poor, the vulnerable, unfortunately, there really isn't that much effort.
Okay. Sanket, you wanted to come in? Yes.
Yeah, Amitabh Dubey, so we've heard, we have seen these budgetary allocation numbers also, which have now started coming out. I wanted to ask you what exactly, according to you, should have been the ideal spend on these two critical sectors, health as well as education. You look at the education budget and perhaps there could be something to cheer because there is a significant jump from 88,000 to 1,04,278. This, given how it has been in the past, seems to be a significant jump.
Yeah, so, again, we have to look at the breakup. the thing to look out for is how much is going into primary education and middle education, because that's really where the system is weakest. Now, there are, of course, states are responsible, the center is responsible, it's a shared responsibility. So again, it's very hard to say, but sure, I would welcome an increased allocation, absolutely. In health, unfortunately, things are going the other way. The allocation and, inflation is rising. So the real allocation is probably going to be negative in the coming year. And that's really quite surprising given all the issues we've faced and the clear realization and the rhetoric from the government that health is somewhere where you can have a lot of positive externalities and leaving aside the fact that the health outcomes in our country are obviously not very good. In fact, health spending, out-of-pocket health spending is one of the leading indicators of people falling below the poverty line.
Okay.
So I would say that it's good that the education allocation seems to be rising, but I think the health allocation is really quite worrisome.
Oh, okay. All right. Let's just, Sanket, go across now to panel. Pawan Munjal is with us. We've got Pirush Khambata of Rasna is with us. Mukesh Bhatani, BMR legal tech expert, is with us. Great to have all of you on board. If I could just go across to Pawan Munjal, if we have a line to Pawan Munjal. Let's go across to Pawan Munjal. Thank you, Mr. Munjal, indeed, for joining us. What are your first comments? What's your view of this budget?
Thank you for having me, Vasu. Good growth budget. Substantial spending on infrastructure. Also around Gati Shakti. There's been a lot of emphasis on Gati Shakti. I do believe all of this should also bring in employment. I'm hoping that most of it the infra would get spent in the rural areas, in the smaller towns, which would definitely bring in employment. I also see the reforms continuing. That too in the states. Clearly, there was a focus on the power sector reforms in the states. I really love the overall focus on sustainability in various different areas. There was talk about the agri sector, there was talked about battery swapping, etc. And most important for me, there was no flip-flop from the previous budgets. We are seeing continuity and consistency.
Okay.
So overall, I'm happy with the budget.
But, I just want to ask you, Mr. Munjal, because while several of you, even in the previous few guests, have come on and said that they're happy with this idea of continuity, but the fact is that we are in the middle of a fairly acute problem of joblessness. Consumption is down. Incomes, particularly of those who are poor and vulnerable, are deeply depressed. And therefore, one needed to hear some big-ticket announcements and spending in that direction. Maybe those numbers are there in the budget papers, but they've not been announced yet. So aren't those areas of concern, like even Gati Shakti that you mentioned, this was something announced last year during the Prime Minister's Independence Day speech. It's been re-announced this time, but it's not clear how much is actually being allotted for it.
Right, you're right. We don't know the numbers yet. But the clear fact that there's a huge jump in the infrastructure spend and the refocus on Gati Shakti, I'm sure they will come out with numbers. And as I said, all of this will definitely bring in employment.
Okay, so you're saying that the idea is to bring in the employment. We're still waiting on the numbers, because at the end of the day, as you know, sir, it's not about intentions. You have to actually back it up with solid outlay. So that, of course, is something which has to be looked at as well. Sanket, we have Pirush Khambata as well of Rasna with us.
Yes.
Mr. Khambata, again.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Before we go to Mr.
Yes, go ahead, Sanket.
Mr. Khambata, I just wanted another question of Mr. Munjal.
Yes.
Mr. Munjal, this infrastructure spend has been the key highlight last year also when it was mentioned in the speech. One question that I wanted to ask you is how do we carry out this spend on infrastructure? It's nice as an idea that so many X lakh crore rupees are going to be spent on infrastructure and a PPP model will be explored. What really do you think needs to be the vision to put, this in actuality and not just pen and paper?
I'm sure when the finance minister put all this together, when she made this announcement, it is all being backed up by substance, a vision and a method to this whole situation, how to go about spending all this money that we are talking about. Frankly, we are looking forward to all this spend and all this spend coming in this coming fiscal only, which is why I'm really banking on this spend, and which is why I'm going on repeating that this will bring in employment.
Okay. All right. Thanks for that, Mr. Munjal. Let's just go across to Piyush Khambhata. Piyush Khambhata, again, it's always great to have intentions, but we are still missing the numbers to actually derive conclusions that this government is seriously committed to ensure that this is a growth-focused or a job-focused budget. Doesn't seem to be too much concrete evidence of that at the moment.
See, I think you are too much getting into numbers at this stage. Numbers obviously will come, numbers will be crunched, but to say that this government doesn't follow action with their words is also not true. And there are a lot of examples we can see actually on the ground. Now, let me take two examples just for it.
No, I'm not saying the government doesn't follow. I'm saying in this budget, I haven't seen, or we haven't yet come across yet the solid numbers to suggest how much is actually being invested in all these areas.
Oh, that's what I'm saying. I'm sure we will see the numbers, but to say that they are not following up with action on what they say may not be completely true. And I was just giving two examples. For example, the Atmanirbhar Bharat package, which was talked about when the COVID pandemic was at its peak. And today you can see that to support Atmanirbhar Bharat, they have announced PLI schemes, they have announced packages in various sectors. Most important, they have also seen that there were a lot of heritage exemptions in custom duties, which was actually helping the foreign people dump their goods in India, and the Indian manufacturing companies had closed down. So the truth is that I always believe that we should support Indian manufacturing for Make in India and Atmanirbhar Bharat. So they have phased out most of the duties and are going to phase out. Even the things which were not touched earlier, capital goods have been touched, and they are saying, okay, we'll phase out duties there. And I think that is a good news for Indian companies who can manufacture those products, but there was no level playing field. Now there will be level playing field. So that is good news. Number two, I always believe that SEZ was one of the best policies in the earlier ages for export growth. And now the fact that SEZs are going to be revived along with the state governments is a very positive news. The fact that now Gift City is going to be the fulcrum for the financial sector services exports in a major way, and the fact that education also is allowed there, I think that is also walking the talk. Now let us look at the commitments in Copenhagen in terms of sustainability that are being followed up with actions on the ground. Now they are talking of green bonds to fund infrastructure in this sector. They are also talking of ensuring a policy on ensuring that the petroleum products, there is a mixture of what they call ethanol. So various things are happening in organic use, less chemical use in agriculture, which also in my mind is very good for the environment. So all these are positive steps which I am seeing. I think what somehow or the other, what probably is being missing out is actually how much this will lead to employment generation, how much this will lead to private sector investing. I think this is something we have to wait and see what happens on this.
Right. Okay. Piyush Khambhata, let's just go across. Sanket, we have Mukesh Bhutani with us, BMR Legal, and also Vishesh Chandyok, who's Grant Thornton Bharat. Mukesh, just good to have you on. So just on taxation, what are we seeing? Because again, we're still waiting on the details from the papers, but as of now, it appears there's been no change in any of the tax slabs. Do you see that as a good or a bad thing? And secondly, the question we're asking all our tax experts on this 30% tax on digital assets, does that mean it's crypto as well, or it's not? What do you make of it?
Hi, Vasu. I think if your reference is to change in tax slabs to give benefit to the common man, yes, there is no change. The underlying philosophy is clear. New taxpayers that have got added in the last few years, the government clearly doesn't want them to leave the tax net, because if you change the slab rates at the lower level, many taxpayers leave an experience of the past. On crypto, I think there's a positive and a negative change. The positive is at least crypto is not considered as a taboo any longer. The government seems to have given a close look at the RBI report.
Very important.
Crypto is not illegal, but it is coming with penal consequences with a high rate of 30% being considered on par with speculative income as well as...
Sorry, Mukesh, just to understand from what you're saying. So are you saying that this digital assets does include crypto? Because there's been some doubt about that since they've not defined it yet. But from your understanding, you think it is crypto?
We will need to look at the digital currency bill, but I think the finance minister, wanted to use a more politically acceptable term for crypto. But I think digital currency would include crypto in my view. We need to... The high rate of 30% and disincentive for taxing it as a gift is clearly evident in terms of government walking a cautious path, because still there is a perception that crypto can be an avenue for money laundering, so on and so forth. I also see the rationalization of capital gains for unlisted securities as a welcome change, because this is going to give thrust to the ecosystem of the startups. And finally, the 2-year window for filing revised return, which also includes declaring income, higher declaring income, is a positive step, because under the current regime, not just the period is less by 1 year, but also you can invite penal consequences as well. So that's a very positive change. There aren't very many.
One question that I wanted to ask you, Mr. Bhutani, before we go to Mr. Chandiok. One question is, do you think that this will end the confusion, at least in the crypto world, that it'll stay or not stay? What will it be called? Do you think this ambiguity is somewhat over, that crypto assets are here to stay? The fact that they are being taxed means that the government has a plan.
Well, I mean, there are two aspects to crypto. One is the digital currency bill, which is a regulatory framework, because until and unless that bill is passed in Parliament, the government will still consider crypto as illegal. Second is the tax proposal. Now, if the tax proposals are going as an integral part of the finance bill, clearly the government seems to have given thought to ensure the passage of the cryptocurrency bill as well, which also has to go as a non-money bill through the Parliament. So I think you will need to read both these together. It seems that the characterization of crypto as an asset is clear from the bill, and the tax position also seems to be very clear.
Okay, we'll need to just look a little closer at the papers, but let's also go across to Kiran Shaw is joining us from Biocon. Great to have you with us, ma'am. Kiran Shaw, just again, first let's just get your big picture take on this budget, which we're still, as we said, trying to pour through and see what are the big signals or messages from it, because a lot of numbers haven't been announced. Does this appear like a kind of status quoist budget to you, or do you see anything, do you see any big ticket message or announcement jumping out at you?
Well, the way I look at it, Vasu, is that, look, we are still not out of the woods. We are just about back to 2019 levels. And I guess it's too premature to announce big ticket, kind of budgetary kind of, fiscal incentives. So I guess we were expecting, announcements which may not be very realistic. What I would like to basically call out are a few things. One is, I think the one section that must be very disappointed are the MSMEs and the service sector. Because I think they do need help. I think they do need fiscal stimulus because they've been impacted very badly. We are seeing, a decline in rural consumption. We are seeing a decline in middle class consumption. And obviously they were hoping that they'd get some fiscal incentives, some allowances, some kind of deductions, which they haven't got. As far as the formal sector is concerned, as we discussed yesterday on Pranay's show, I think they are the ones who are driving this economic revival in a very strong way. But obviously, you cannot expect anything more for the formal sector as such. The only disappointment I have is that, I was expecting some incentives for R&D in pharma. And what I find is, although the finance minister called out the need for investing in R&D and blended financing, to my surprise, I find that pharma R&D doesn't even get a mention on the R&D outlay in the budget. So that is a bit disappointing. But I would say by and large, this is a pretty balanced budget because, trying to contain the fiscal deficit at 6.9%, making sure that there are no negative surprises. I think she's managed that pretty well. And I think what I also like about the budget is this whole approach to ease of doing business through digital trust and digital compliance. I think the government is investing in the digital economy and in the digital architecture of where it wants to go. That's the way I see it. And of course, the investment of an increase of capital expenditure by 35% obviously is a big ticket announcement, which hopefully will, spur economic growth and job creation for the lower classes.
Ms. Shaw, one question I wanted to ask you, what would you say about the health allocation in the budget?
I'm actually happy that they've talked about, it's not a huge allocation, but I still think it's important to call out healthcare. I think the whole digital healthcare is important. I'm glad they called out mental health because that also is another very important initiative which they've announced as a sort of a new initiative anchored by NIMHANS and IIITB in Bangalore, because I think that is going to be important. Again, it's all about digital health, creating the digital infrastructure for healthcare, because I can tell you that without a digital platform for healthcare, nothing is going to move. And so from that point of view, we have a roadmap ahead of us. So the foundation is being created right now. We aren't seeing great announcements in terms of, insurance, although, certain announcements have been made in healthcare. But I think this is an evolving space. So I don't think you can expect big announcement at this point in time.
So you would still maintain that what we hope to achieve can be achieved with this sort of budgetary allocation, or at least it's a good start that we have now started gradually increasing the health spend.
Yeah. So I would say, right now is a time when we are beginning to see some green shoots. We've seen the highest GST collections in January. We are beginning to see the sort of the receding pandemic right now. Let's hope we are not struck by another wave. But having said that, we've also vaccinated a large part of our population. So I, for one, believe that even if you haven't given any respite to the MSMEs, at least open up the economy. I think the economy needs to open up. Otherwise, the service sector and the MSMEs are going to be further hit. So I really worry about this particular sector.
Also, I wanted to ask you, Kiran Shaw, on jobs, because, while, of course, tax collections, etc., have been robust, unemployment is a huge problem.
Yes.
I don't know if we saw or heard enough in the budget about that.
No, you're absolutely right, Vasu. I really worry about these huge job losses that have taken place in the sectors that I talked about. Whether it's the service sector, which is really the travel, tourism and hospitality sectors, whether it is simple service sectors like, the beauty parlors and what have you, or whether it is the MSME sector in general. I think huge job losses because, these lockdowns have impacted them at a much higher scale than what it has affected the formal sector. So there's no doubt about it. There is a huge disparity between the formal and informal sector when it comes to pandemic impact. And I think that's where the unemployment has been seen. 4.5 million people have been moved further into poverty because of the pandemic. These are not good signs. And therefore, I think, we hope that this capital expenditure that is going to be deployed towards infrastructure will be done fast so that you can at least create some jobs for, the people who have been thrown out of employment at least the very lower levels.
Kiran Mazumdar Shah, is it possible for you to elaborate on why you feel that the MSME sector has found itself in a tricky situation post this budget? Because, last year we've seen that apart from the budget also, in that stimulus package that was announced, there was a very strong focus by the government on this very sector, the MSME sector.
Yeah, yeah. So let's put it this way. If you look at, say, just the auto industry, I think if you look at the auto industry, the demand for, two-wheelers and small vehicles is declining. The demand there is really for the larger vehicles because of, as I said, the formal sector has done well, and therefore the demand for the higher grade vehicles is much higher. So I think most of the MSMEs are catering as ancillaries to the category of vehicles that are at the lower end of the scale. That's where I think they are being hit very badly. And I also think that a number of the other engineering MSMEs have also been hit. A lot of the MSMEs that are functioning in many of the other ancillary industries that have been hit are also suffering. So I think it's something that you have to look at in terms of what do we need to do to make sure that the ancillary industry that supports the larger industry is revived. I think that's what you need to do.
Okay. All right. Kiran Shaw, thanks very much indeed for being with us. Let's go across now. Sunil Mathur is with us, Managing Director and CEO of Siemens Limited. Mr. Mathur, can I just get your first comments on this budget? Again, we're still trying to figure out in concrete terms, apart from a broader vision and a broader kind of idea of where they want to go with the economy, in concrete terms, what do you see which is significant in terms of government investment, spending, all of that?
Thank you very much for having me. I think the direction for the government was set in the last budget in terms of where they want to go for capital expenditure and so on. What I find really heartening in this budget is the fact that there is directionally consistency. And that they have not changed the direction. There continues to be a focus. There is a continuity of the growth story that was laid out last year. More importantly, there is a clear understanding that the only way to nurture growth in the economy will be through public investment. And I think this is where I'd really like to concentrate on, as you say, very specifically. Very clearly, private sector has not been spending too much in capital expenditure in the last couple of months. There has been a slight uptick in demand, and there has been a growth in utilization, but we are nowhere near the levels where we can be and should be. The only way, therefore, to kickstart that investment is to have public sector expenditure going up, in particular in infrastructure and capital expenditure. So I think that has been the central part of this budget, with the 35% increase in public spending on capital expenditure. And I think that is very critical. The fact that they are opening up defense, opening up the railways to much more capital expenditure very consequently, the fact that they are talking about opening up R&D and technology, the fact that they have focused right through the budget discussions on technology, drones, 5G, e-vehicles, batteries, etc. These are critical parts that will talk about growing the economy there. More importantly, public expenditure, linking it to the Gati Shakti program, this will generate jobs. Now, most of the jobs are out there in the remote parts of the country. This is where most of the projects are actually happening. And every such large metro project, every such large transmission project, every such large railway project, rolling stock project, brings in a huge amount of employment right down the food chain, and will also start feeding the micro, medium, and small enterprises as well. So I think the focus is very clear on growth through public expenditure, and that has really been the central part of what they are focusing on.
Sure. Okay. Vishesh Chandiok, CEO of Grant Thornton Bharat, is also with us. Mr. Mathur, please do stay on because there is a question I want to ask you specifically about 5G. But first, let's get in a comment from Mr. Chandiok. Vishesh, those 2, 3 or 4 key things which you feel really stand out, or what are those areas where this was a bit of an opportunity missed, according to you?
I think I entirely agree with Mr. Mathur, what he said. The framework was set last year, and you can't say that this budget wasn't 100% consistent with that trust focus. I think your channel also uses that word, trust. That was the overall focus on keeping it consistent and aligned to the themes from last year. So enhancing predictability in schemes, things like, the FY23-24 push towards the new manufacturing units as well as startups, for example, enhances that predictability so investments can happen. Right? At the same time, people will say, why can't you announce that into the long term? Because you want investments to come in. That's why you don't want to announce it into the long term. I think the clear push also for digital and new age industry support. If you look at, of course, RBI has had that central bank digital currency pilot going on, but giving confirmation that there will be a central bank digital currency that will be launched within the next fiscal in India. The fine print somewhere there was post offices to be converted, into banks, and these digital banking units to be set up in 75 remote rural districts. That again was very interesting. Of course, data centers getting the infrastructure status, and overall that push for infra. Of course, through those 7 engines of Gati Shakti, but also the 1 lakh crore, which I think is a 10x increase in towards enhancing states' capital expenditure towards largely urban infra is pretty significant. I think the crypto tax itself again reinforces that predictability focus, whatever it may be. Yes, by hard to track. How will you track transfers? We'll have to read the fine print, and some of this will evolve over time. But I think again, now what are some of the misses? Of course, people will say, those at the bottom of the pyramid. Some change to basic exemption limits. Some change to the 10 lakh rupee threshold at which 30% tax starts could have been achieved. But I think overall, if we look at continuing the slow move towards the glide path of 4.5% by 25-26 fiscal deficit, and still committing to, I think she said 6.4% next year fiscal deficit, should give us the confidence of the government's confidence on both its collections as well as the spend.
Okay. Mr. Mathur, before I come to you, also welcoming Mr. Sandeep Somani, past president of FICCI and vice chairman of and managing director of Somani Impresa Group. Thank you very much, Mr. Somani, for joining us. Mr. Mathur, before I ask you my question on 5G, there's a response from Rahul Gandhi, who has tweeted, first big response from the Congress party, which says, Modi government's zero-sum budget, nothing for salaried class, middle class, the poor and deprived, youth, farmers as well. Is also mentioned by Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw. But Mr. Mathur, that point that you were making about 5G, apart from the announcement, in terms of infrastructure, what do you think is required from here on for the smooth transition from 4G to 5G? Do you think we have this in place?
I think the telecom companies have been working on this for quite some time. And I do believe that this is not something that is just the announcement that's happening. It's actually a culmination of a lot of work that has been done over a period of time. Optic fiber cables have been laid through most of the country. I think we shouldn't underestimate the fact that we will probably be one of the few countries in the world that will be into the 5G technologies ahead of most developed countries already. Now, what does this really mean on a real basis? This is not about mobile phones and that sort of thing. This is about really revamping the infrastructure of the country and the way revamping Industry 4.0, the way we manufacture. We want to be the manufacturing center of the world. This can only come if we adopt Industry 4.0. 5G will be absolutely critical to that. To the infrastructure in transportation, 5G will be critical for metros, for railways, for signaling, for transportation, for power. So this is really going to be the core and will give us really a leapfrog effect there. I do believe, yes, we may have a couple of teething problems initially, but who doesn't? But I think 5G is something that we can really be proud of when it is rolled out over here as being one of the front runners in the world introducing this technology.
Okay. Mr. Somani, hits and misses, according to you, of this budget.
So good afternoon. I think for business, the most important thing is policy stability and continuity. And I think the Honorable Finance Minister has promised us that last time. And I'm very happy that she is adhering to her promise. I think it's, from a directionality point of view, it's a very good budget. It continues the government's thrust on infrastructure, particularly on significant road development, as well as the additional 3.8 crore households to be covered for water. There is no tinkering that the government has done, which sometimes it gets tempted to do, and that is a positive. I think the focus on Atmanirbhar Bharat continues in terms of the further enhancements of the PLI-linked schemes, which will not only generate additional revenue for the government in the longer term, but also create significant employment as these industries start coming in.
Yeah. Now,
there's also focus on new technology on the agri side in terms of green pesticides, etc., and use of drones for scanning and giving inputs to the farmers. And I think that's a positive thing to use technology.
But Mr. Somani, if I can just jump in for a second, Srinivasan here, that this idea that maintaining status quo is good, policy continuity and all of that, and there's no doubt that that is good. But when you have fairly acute economic distress, particularly at the lower levels, when you have joblessness, when you have a consumer dip in consumer spending, incomes are suppressed, rural and urban, then status quo doesn't help. What is needed are dramatic gestures, spending, putting cash in people's hands, ways of spurring demand, etc., etc. And where is that in this budget?
So you'll see, Srinivasan, they've not really been aggressive on cutting down the fiscal deficit. The government continues to spend. There's a 10 lakh crore plus capex. So the government is doing heavy lifting in terms of capex expenditure, at least till the time the private capex cycle doesn't kick in, which shows now signs of improving. So I think the government is taking a bet that they will do some heavy lifting, and in the meanwhile, the private sector will follow. Everything the government can't do. They've tried to, in the last 2 years of the pandemic, tried to insulate the lowest and the most poor people by giving free food, which was quite ample, and it has stopped a lot of issues in the rural sector. They've been giving things of that kind for subsistence. But I think the clear thrust in this budget is to continue to encourage industry to expand, and certain initiatives, although I'll have to look at the fine prints, but the EODB initiatives on the ease of doing business, if they continue to work on that, then I think the process of putting up and running an industry will improve further. These were suggestions from FICCI. We were the first to start this study.
Let me just on this capex, because everyone has talked about the big jump in capital expenditure, which for our viewers is basically the amount that the government spends on new projects. It's actually a jump from 5.5 lakh crores to 7.7 lakh crores. It's a jump from the budget estimates of the last budget is 5.5 lakh crores. It was revised to 6.3 lakh crores. So it's really a jump from about 6 lakh crores to 7.7 or 8 lakh crores, which is still a significant jump. But there are 2 points to that, which I wanted to get your view. One is the overall expenditure of the government is 39 lakh crores, of which only about 7.7 lakh crores is being spent on capex, which is on new projects and so on. That means about 30 plus lakh crores is still being spent on salaries and servicing interest and all of that. So, is that ratio still a problem? Secondly, even with the 7.7 lakh crore figure, we've got a tweet from SC Garg. He's the, as we know, the former finance secretary, who's saying the increase seems only on two accounts, 1 lakh crore of loans to states and green bonds borrowing for public sector. No real increase in the government's own capex? Question mark.
So, that these details are currently not available. I mean, I have not gone through them personally, but I'm sure once we read the fine print, we'll know exactly where the government is spending.
Yeah.
It shows intent to, increase capex, and I think that's a good thing.
Okay.
I can't cross all the T's and dot all the I's today.
No, fair enough, of course. But Mr. Mathur, the same question, not getting into the nitty-gritties, but overall, if the government is saying that we're going to spend about 40 lakh crores in a year, but more than 30 lakh crores, close to almost 32 lakh crores, is not going into capital expenditure. It's going to be, salaries and all that, which every government keeps saying they're going to cut down on. Is that ratio a problem?
I think the ratio of capex is not wrong. It's gone up over a period of time. I think we are around 5.5% right now of GDP capex, which is not too low, but it's not too high either. There is definitely scope to increase the capex, and the government is actually doing that. Now, whether the rest of the expenditure that they have earmarked in terms of consumption, whether that is realistic, I'm sure there are inefficiencies in the system that can be taken out, but there are also OPEX expenses that the government is spending in terms of growing the economy. And there we talk about, in particular, there are areas like when you get into technology areas, it's not all capex. There are expenditures on R&D, there are expenditures on growing a whole lot of other parts of the economy as well. Now, answering the question in terms of whether 30 lakhs is huge or not, I don't think I'm really qualified to put a specific number on what would be the right amount. As with most corporates, there are always inefficiencies in the system and they need to be taken out. But again, I'd just like to focus on what the government is really centered this budget on, and that is growth. And the growth that they are talking about is growth through capital expenditure and through large projects. Now, let's not underestimate also the knock-on effect that the 7.5 lakh crores outlay that the government wants to do in capex will have through to the rest of the economy.
Okay.
You are talking about additional jobs. You are talking about small and medium enterprises. This is not only about providing monetary benefits to small and medium enterprises. Most small and medium enterprises are working on working capital cycles of 30 days. So you can keep on pumping them with credit. At some point in time, they need a pipeline of demand coming into the system in order to keep their head above water. So really, the only way to fire the economy is for the government's expenditure to actually increase. And I think that is what they have done or focused on last year, outlined last year, and are continuing with. For most corporates, particularly in infrastructure and long technology areas, consistency is the most important. Consistency of policy, ease of doing business, and a storyline that is long-term, defined, and a clear roadmap of what is to get there. And I think that is what has come out very clearly in the budget on railways, on defense, and so on.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Dr. Naresh Trehan is also with us. Of course, Medanta, thank you for joining us, Dr. Trehan. Just your first comments on this budget, because we are still trying to see, specifically when it comes to health, what the numbers are. I think Sanket had found some numbers which seem to suggest that there's not been a very significant jump from last year.
Yeah, I just found out myself because the finance minister did not mention it. But in the budget document, there is a 16% increase from 64,000 crores to 88 or something like that. So it's not a significant amount because, we are so underfunded for healthcare because we are talking about 1.2% and then it needs to go to 2.5% ASAP. So from that point of view, not a significant thing has been done. And overall, there was very little to talk about except those three things, which is one, that skilling will help. The skilling movement of increasing the outlay and the fact that it can all be digital is also going to help the healthcare sector because we are very intense employers for that segment of skills. The second thing is that we have the National Health Registry will definitely help because that by itself will let us know where the whole healthcare delivery system, the support system is adequate and where it's not, so that it will help hugely in the planning and also integrate the whole system. The third thing was that the mental health portal, which was an important step in the sense that many people have suffered during this long 2 years of pandemic. And these pandemics are not going to stop. These are just rollover effects. We'll see some coming down the pike soon. So on one hand, we believe that the healthcare structure, although we fought the 2 years of COVID waves quite well, we still need to enhance it and actually strengthen it. So there are 2-3 things that we had requested the finance ministry for, which have not been addressed yet, at least. And one of them was the fact that health sector should be put into the national priority segment, where we can access funding for establishing the rest of or extra. All of us have that ability to go to tier 2, tier 3 cities, that we could get access funds at a reasonable rate. The other thing was that there is a gap funding request also in areas where there is low income levels, where it will be difficult for healthcare facilities to survive. And the third thing that we were asking for is, which is even the most important of the lot, and it would be revenue neutral to the government, is the readjustment of GST. We as healthcare providers had requested the government a few years ago that the patient should be exempt from GST so that the burden on him does not increase. But what has happened is that we have to, as providers, we have to pay 18% on all the inputs that we get. So that it means that there is a mismatch there. Although the patient doesn't pay, but the cost of delivery becomes higher. And then they have to pay for their insurance premium, they have to pay 18% GST. So what we had proposed was either make healthcare a zero GST so that even the inputs we don't have to pay GST on, or put a small charge on the patient, 3 to 5%, which will enable us to do a set-off. And the second thing would be you can deduct that from the insurance premium so that it becomes neutral to the government. So it's not been addressed. I know it's a complex subject. Hopefully, we'll continue with our inputs on that and the government will respond. But besides that, there is no major big bang change in the healthcare segment of this budget.
Right. And that is a significant point, and we'll discuss this in greater detail. Dr. Triyandu, stay on with us. Ajit Gulabchand, Chairman and Managing Director of Hindustan Construction Company Limited, is also with us. Mr. Gulabchand, your views on this budget?
Well, it doesn't have. My comments are based on the speech that the finance minister gave in the House today, because we haven't gone into the details of the budget document in order to know if there are other surprises, both in fine print or any other things that have been missed out while speaking in Parliament. Having said that, from overall, they've decided that despite some of the restrictions, that fiscal deficit, as well as the fear of inflation that comes, that they have decided to go ahead with a large spend on capital expenditure. Almost 9 to 10% of the total receipts is being spent on infrastructure, which is roads and railways. There are some other hidden infrastructure in agricultural development, another 2%, so making it about 11%. This is approximately 9% or 7% of GDP. So I think this is a very healthy investment being made in capital expenditure for India to lay the foundation for continued growth to reach its $5 trillion economy target. One. Second is, at a time when unemployment has been a curse at this state, as well as having infrastructure being constructed during this period, creates employment, immediate employment. It's a multiplier for other employment that comes as a result of the infrastructure coming into being. And to that extent, I think this budget has done well, given the constraints, because there is always the fear that while you go ahead and spend so much money, you might be tempting inflation to come on. And if it comes on in a big way, it once again stymies the growth of infrastructure, and the growth rate gets discounted. So to that extent, I think they've done a very, very tight job of spending this money on infrastructure. It is just 9% of the receipts. It is also about 7-8% of GDP, which I think is a very, very good sign. The dangers apart. The dangers are known. It is either inflation on one side, not generating enough employment to beat the trend is the other. And I think they've done well.
Mr. Gulabchand, if I may ask you, what are the areas where we could have actually made a difference as far as this budget is concerned? I'm not going to ask you to comment on the politicians, but some of the points that are being raised is that there's nothing in here for the middle class, nothing in here for the farmers, nothing in here for MSMEs. I want to know from you, what's your opinion on what could have been done differently?
I think increasingly the budget, while it is meant as a kind of a budget for the year, it has become a statement of an economic policy and economic thinking that they're up to. So what they are trying to do is stimulate the economy enough to get a good growth rate. And this has to be done despite the problems of fiscal deficit created by the pandemic and our earlier slowdown before the pandemic. So when this is the situation, as far as we are concerned, doing something for a class, they have not doled out subsidies by class or by order of people. They have tried to create a situation for the economy to grow. And for that, they have, despite these limitations, talked of a very large amount of infrastructure spend, which is what we call the capex spend. And that, I think, is what's going to help. And they have to also tightly manage on the other side the fear that inflation will go out of hand, as well as that the infrastructure they're going to build may not happen fast enough because of inflation and other situations, the disease rearing its head again in some other form, etc. These fears continue. So I think that doing for the overall economy does for everybody.
Mr. Gulabchand, my final question, do you feel that this extra stress on capital expenditure as outlaid by the finance minister, which you also mentioned in the opening comment, could actually start a cycle of growth? More capital expenditure, more employment opportunities, core sectors improving. Do you feel that this is the key, the mantra to reviving the economy?
See,
or so is the vision of the government?
I think what they've understood is the economy must grow is the answer. While you have to do, and out of the 37 lakh total receipts, only 9% is being spent on the infrastructure. The rest is going towards welfare and several issues. So putting a little balm on the pain has also been done. But when it comes to growth, to create that growth, it has decided that infrastructure spend is the best. Not only it creates employment during the period of infrastructure construction, but the multiplier that the constructed facilities create also create employment and growth. So I think they've done very well here. What we need to worry about is that that another disease does not again come up and hit us again. Second is inflation doesn't really go out of hand to kill it. And for that period, they have shown a lot more fiscal responsibility in what they're doing. And I think, therefore, it's a conservative budget with the right welfare measures and, given the constraints, the right amount of expenditure on infrastructure with a $5 trillion economy in mind at a later date.
All right, Mr. Gulabchand, thank you very much for joining us. Siddharth Nigam, National Managing Partner of Advisory Services, Grant Thornton Bharat, is also with us. Mr. Nigam, what according to you are the hits and misses of this budget?
Thank you. Pleasure being here. It's a very well-balanced, future-oriented budget. I think, we always have expectations that the budget should cover every little bit. But I think if I was to look at this holistically, they addressed build-out of infrastructure, MSME sector was covered, agri was covered. The themes of self-reliance, self-sufficiency, sustainability were adequately there. I think.
Would you like to elaborate on how the MSME sector was covered, Mr. Nigam? Because many experts who have come on our show, even the opposition leader, seem to suggest that this is one area that has been left high and dry.
I think, there are indirect benefits through, investment, the capex that is going to happen. I think if you look at the build out of infrastructure, there is a role that MSME sector plays in that at a much smaller subcontractor level. I think it's gearing up. Being an optimist, looking at the positives of, employment generation, involvement of smaller businesses into the capex. I think one of the key areas to me was the provision of potable water in, several crore households. I think, again, it is bringing the nation or pushing the nation forward on the development agenda. I think there was also coverage of renewable energy and sustainability as a theme. And again, it's good to see the commitment of the government on, enhancing our renewable energy platform. I also believe that there is an indirect spurring of consumer demand that will happen when highways and roads will get developed. Our supply chains will become more efficient. We can take advantage of the length and breadth of the country, and that in turn will, spur the consumer demand. I think the other, big highlight for me was inclusion of the Department of Post, so the post office network into the banking, network. I think it almost trebles the points of banking available to the citizens in this country, and I think that is also going to push our agenda on financial inclusion forward. I think the commitment to reform, the commitment to ease of doing business, whether it's about making winding up of companies more efficient, it is. An area where I think we expected a little bit more about was around cross-border, insolvencies. Maybe that's an area that still needs to be looked at as part of the IBC. I think one of the other things that I was listening to Dr. Trehan, we were expecting a little more on the healthcare sector, given what we have faced in the last 2 years. So that's certainly, I think there was an expectation on a little bit more for. But I think the positive around the allied healthcare professionals bill will address some of the capacity building for the sector, maybe not through the budget, but the government's commitment to the sector. I think all in all, the inflow of global capital is robust. It continues. I think year on year, we are seeing India as a country where global capital seems to find its
home. Let's see. So yes, there's quite a bit there which, as you said, needs to be unpacked. We have Chandrajit Banerjee of CII with us, but first let me go across to Ajay Singh, Chairman and Managing Director, SpiceJet. Good to have you on, Ajay Singh. Ajay Singh, your first, we'll get specific in a second, but your first comments on this budget, do you think it has done enough, or has the Finance Minister played a little too safe?
Well, I think she had plenty of money. GST collections are really robust. And I must say that she spent it well. I never expected that capex will be hiked by 35%, really from this 5.5 lakh crores to 7.5. And if you look at it from the perspective of what they're giving to the states as well, this capex spending is close to 10 lakh crores, which is absolutely incredible. Never expected it, and this should create growth and employment. But I think interestingly also the fact that she's spoken so much about the sunrise sectors. It really is a sunrise budget in terms of the amount she's spoken about green and digital and so on. In pretty much in every space she's spoken on the digital impact of things.
Okay.
Whether you look at the education, you look at health, you look at skilling. In every space they've spoken of digital.
Okay.
And so I think overall pretty interesting, pretty good budget.
Okay, so sunrise sector is of course important, but let's look at some of the old sort of pillars of the economy, which includes, by the way, airlines like yours, and you've been running into some turbulent weather as well with SpiceJet. Is that one area where you felt that the government, I mean, this is not just this budget, but even in previous budget, that these areas of the economy which have been hit hard by the pandemic, tourism, airlines, all of that there's not been enough of a financial safety net?
Definitely. I think as far as aviation is concerned, countries around the world have supported the sector to stay alive. This includes even support to airlines like British Airways and Emirates and Cathay and Singapore Airlines and so on. That clearly has not happened in India. The fact that oil is at $90 globally, and that is the largest input cost in aviation. And the fact that there is little relief is, of course, a matter of great concern. But of course, overall growth in the economy always contributes to greater traffic on airlines, occupancy in hotel rooms, etc., etc. So hopefully, with the amount of money that they are putting into the economy by way of public expenditure, that should assist the economy as a whole. But of course, aviation per se has not really been looked at seriously, and I think the states have some of the states with the constant advocacy of the Ministry of Civil Aviation have reduced VAT on ATF. About 16 or 17 states have done that recently. That's a great positive, but much more needs to be done.
Much more needs
certainly.
Okay, I have more questions for you, but I'm sure Sanket also wants to get in here. So, Sanket, go for it.
Yes, one question I want to ask. Yes, Mr. Ajay Singh, one question I want to ask. Do you think that this capital expenditure and the infra spend and the stress on infrastructure that the government has been putting again and again and again is indirectly, Mr. Singh, going to help, airlines, other different associated and affiliated sectors?
Certainly. No question about it, because, whenever government spends more money, creates more infrastructure, more jobs get created, more incomes get generated, people travel more. There's no question about it. This does definitely and more than indirectly helps sectors like airline and travel and tourism. These, of course, are the most affected sectors during the pandemic. And while the government has extended, another 50,000 crore rupees by way of an enhanced ECLGS scheme, and that's a positive. Perhaps sectors like aviation really need to be looked upon as strategic sectors where we can create huge amounts of employment by building hubs in our country. Why should our hub really be in Dubai and Abu Dhabi and Doha? It needs to be in India. And to do that, of course, a comprehensive policy is really needed.
Last question to you, Ajay Singh, before we let you go, that because as you were saying that you were hoping for a little more support from the government when it comes to aviation, how much of the troubles that you yourself, SpiceJet, are going through are because of some of these pandemic stresses, and how, without this kind of support, how serious is the problem for you right now?
Well, of course, airlines have to be innovative, and airlines like SpiceJet have actually started a large logistics business called Spice Express, which is helping SpiceJet in a big way. We are working on certain other projects as well. But as a whole, I think taxation on aviation remains incredibly high. I mean, if firstly, oil itself is at $90. On top of that is excise duty. On top of that is the VAT, which in places like Delhi and Mumbai is about 25%. So of every 100 rupees that airlines make, about 25 rupees goes towards government as taxes of the top line. And that's an incredibly high number, unsustainable. And, clearly, if you need much more connectivity, if you need much more air cargo, if you need India to be a global hub, not only for MRO activities, but a passenger hub of the sort that Dubai and Abu Dhabi, you need to make the taxes be lower.
Okay. Well, good luck with your new plans and let's hope you hang in there. We will go across now to Chandrajit Banerjee of CII, but also just welcoming Sanjeev Mehta, President FICCI, also CMD of Hindustan Unilever Limited, one of our big giants, consumer giants. But Chandrajit Banerjee, are you now ready with the rating for the budget? Because I asked you for one before the budget. Now, are we ready with a scale of 1 to 10? Is it 11 or 12?
No, I'll avoid that because I don't really think that we can rate the budget, but definitely say that most of what we had been asking for and looking for, we see place of that in the budget. And in your show just about a few days back, I was speaking about a budget which needs to be future oriented. Look at India a few years hence, and then create a roadmap. I see that. We talked about a $9 trillion economy over a period of time. I see those roadmaps pretty set. A futuristic budget through Finance Minister referred to as Amrut Kal. So a lot of digital there, a lot of tech there, circular economy, green economy. So all of that I give a lot of see that to be big important future focused budget. Second, I see this budget to be also an infrastructure budget. Last year was an infrastructure budget. This is a super infrastructure budget with the phenomenal focus on Gati Shakti. But while we had the launch of the Gati Shakti just a few months back, but what's more important in that Gati Shakti, if you really see the 7 engines, but it's a connecting through infrastructure and through Gati Shakti, connecting rural India, connecting the coastal India, connecting different people of India. So those type of synergies is something which I really like in the budget. The other important point which I see, for which I would rate the budget very high, is of course the public investment in capital expenditure. Everyone is talking about that 7.5 lakh crore, and I think this was a very, very smart move which will crowd in private investment and will bring in private investment strongly. We were talking about what is it that which was holding back private sector to come in to expand capacity. And as you see, most of the private sector, we are talking about capacity enhancement, so stay about 70% or so. This will definitely help.
This will definitely help. All right. Okay. So let's see how it all plays out. Thanks very much indeed, Chandrajit Banerjee, for being with us. And we will, of course, keep coming back to you for more. Let's just go across now to Sanjeev Mehta of HUL. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mehta, for joining us.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Srinivasan.
Good afternoon.
Delighted to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. Mr. Mehta, before we get into the budget, I just want to ask you that overall, because the economic survey already pointed to the fact that the economy has started to kind of pull back, in your own experience with HUL, firstly, did you at all face any stress during the pandemic, or were the numbers anyway looking good? And if not, are they now back to pre-pandemic?
Thank you for that question, Srinivasan. If we look at in the last accounting year or the fiscal year, we had a 6% top line growth, and which is understandable because it was very severe in the first wave where a lot of severe lockdowns happened. And if we look at now for the first 3 quarters, we are running at double-digit growth. So if you look at the numbers for the largest consumer goods company in the country, it may look very all right. But we are very clearly seeing, while the headline numbers are good, there is a stress on volumes, especially in rural areas.
I see.
And volumes is contributed by several factors. Amongst them is the unprecedented inflation as well.
That's very interesting. Yes. That's very interesting. You're saying that, sir, because on one hand, you're saying that the top line numbers may look robust, but inflation, which is kind of hitting people's pockets, particularly in rural areas, that has led to some dip in spending. Is that correct?
That's right, especially in volumes, not in the headline spending. And because what happens is when the prices go up, then the consumers do titrate the volumes. Yeah, they have a finite sum of money to spend. So they would still spend, say, on the essentials. But because the prices have gone up, they will be buying lesser volumes.
Okay, understood. So where you may buy 2 soaps or 3, I mean, you cut down whatever the goods are.
That's right. That's right.
You will be constantly checking. But tell me, Mr. Mehta, because now with this budget, and everyone has been talking about this, that there has to be a way found to spur demand to get consumer spending back on track. Where is the evidence that this budget has managed to achieve that in concrete terms?
Yeah, there is a philosophical aspect behind the budget. One thing we could have asked for is, could you have more direct transfer of money to the consumers? And that could be done by increasing the outlay on Manrega, or by bringing in a urban equivalent of Manrega, or reducing the taxes on the middle class. That would have directly put in more money in the hands of consumers. But the government has opted for, rather than giving out doles, they said, okay, let us spend more money on infrastructure. And what infrastructure does, if spent rightly, and I hope they front load it, because this will bring in the multiplier effect that all of us crave for. This will indirectly bring in more money into the hands of consumers, because it will create more jobs. And 2 things which have been a bit of sore point for the economy, Srinivasan. One is that the private consumption has been still below the pre-COVID levels.
Right.
And linked to this is the private capex.
Yes.
Now, what this 7.5 lakh crore, and if you look at what the central government would be helping the states, you're talking about 10 lakh crore of 4% of GDP. This is a massive outlay. And if spent prudently, if spent front end, this would bring in the multiplier effect and would have a long-term impact on getting sustainable growth.
So let me ask you on this, because this has been a talking point the whole afternoon about the big jump in capital expenditure. Now the thing is that even last time the capex amount was not small. It was 5.5 lakh crores. That was the budgetary estimate. The actual spend, according to the government, was actually 6.3 lakh crores. So they actually ended up spending 6.3 lakh crores last financial year, which has now gone up to almost 7.7 lakh crores. But even with that fairly sizable 6 lakh odd crore spend, Mr. Mehta, why did we not see that, if that was meant to translate into more jobs, if that was also meant to spur private sector, capital investment? Why do you think that did not happen to scale?
That's right. Let me give you my perspective on that, Srinivasan. If you look at it, we had an acute second wave, which did impact massively the contact, the sectors, travel, tourism. And if you were to look at it from the different sectors of GDP, this contact sector is still below the pre-COVID level, because this has been impacted massively. And one must also appreciate, we say that this has not had an impact. We lost about 7% of the GDP in the first year of the pandemic. And in the second year of pandemic, we recovered that and maybe a percent point more, which is a good bit, something which we as Indians ought to be proud of. And I think the challenge now is, having got that kind of growth rate, how do you sustain the growth going forward? The government, to balance the books, Mr. Srinivasan, they could have done that. Instead of 7.5 lakh crore or 10 lakh crore, they could have pulled back by 1 lakh crore and given in direct transfer of money. Optically, it may have felt good, and it could have resulted in immediate transfer of money. But I think philosophically, government has said, let us look at what will help us sustain the growth rate getting into the future. Now, let me also tell you the benefits of what the government is planning to do. If we were to invest it prudently, like it is envisaged, multimodal roads of 25,000 kilometers, linking of rivers. This will bring down our logistics cost significantly. Our logistics cost in the country today is about 400 to 500 bits higher than a peer group.
Right.
So this would have another impact on the industry. And I believe that's the reason I'm so delighted. And the other bit, if I may just add, is the neoclassical would have said, bring down the fiscal deficit. That would have meant either raise the taxes, and there was a lot of clamor, bring in wealth tax, etc. I'm so happy the government has not fallen prey to it.
Okay.
And the second could have been reduce expense.
Right.
I'm delighted that the government has been courageous to say, we will keep the fiscal deficit at about 6% till the economy is firmly on its stand, because the recovery is still underway. It hasn't fully happened yet.
Okay. So you're saying those are positives. Very interesting points. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Mehta, for joining us. Let's go across now to Harsh Neotia, past President FICCI, Chairman Ambuja Neotia Holdings Limited, joining us, I believe, from Kolkata, if I'm not wrong. But anyway, good to have you on, Harsh Neotia. Let me just first start by asking you the same question which I asked Mr. Mehta of HUL. Harsh, that as far as your own area is concerned, real estate and all of that, have you seen any shift in terms of between the past couple of quarters? Have things started to pick up, or is there still stress?
So if you take real estate, I think there has been a significant pickup, particularly in the last 6-8 months. Of course, there has been the buyers have been very conscious to not pre-book apartments with builders where they are not comfortable about delivery, etc. So there has been a bunching of demand towards more credible developers.
Right.
But having said that, there is definitely a significant pickup, and I see that sustaining, at least in the housing space. In the commercial space, it's been a mixed bag. Some cities have done very well, particularly Bangalore, Hyderabad, etc. And some cities like Calcutta are yet to pick up on the commercial side.
How are you finding it for yourself, for Ambuja Neotia? Are you seeing, are things looking good, or are you still under pressure?
No. On real estate, we are looking good. I think we are comfortable. On hospitality, there has been a very clear divergence. Resorts have done extremely well, better than pre-pandemic. But the city hotels are still hurting, partly because international traffic is not here, and even big weddings and MICE.
And you keep locking down, opening up. So,
So that is hurting. So I think probably now, if we don't get another wave, we should be back on track.
Okay, fingers crossed. Now let's come to the budget, and let's talk about infrastructure, because that's become a big talking point for this budget, and it kind of broadly links to the area where you're in, where many have said that they are happy with the government's continued sort of commitment to building infrastructure as a way of spurring growth, creating jobs, etc. But again, not to be a skeptic, Harsh Neotia, but these are announcements that were made in previous budgets as well. Even in the last budget, there was talk of an infrastructure pipeline and all of that. Do we actually see that big shift on the ground? Have those promises translated into reality so we can take the current set of promises more credibly, or is there a gap between what is often promised, during the course of the budget speech and the actual action?
Frankly, on the infrastructure front, I think this government's performance has been pretty decent. Not that everything happens, because we know that there are sometimes litigations, land acquisition issues, and other issues that come in. But having said that, I think there has been a considerable, push on infrastructure. It has accelerated in its implementation. And then during the pandemic, we saw relentless activity in many cities on infrastructure. So I would feel encouraged by that. And therefore, I feel that this continuous push on it is very essential. We all know that India's infrastructure needs a lot more to be done to reduce the cost of doing business and generally for the convenience of its people. So I think that focus is well-founded.
Okay. But if there was, okay, so before we let you go, if there was one good thing or the biggest positive in this budget that you saw and the biggest negative or absence or area of worry that you felt wasn't addressed, what would that be?
Well, one of the big positives I saw is that there's continuity. They've not tinkered around with tax rates. They've not done any surprises. I mean, there was a feeling that they might bring in some further taxation to increase the tax collection because of the deficit, but that hasn't happened. So there's been, I think, an attempt to create a more trusting environment. I think there's also a reference to in the finance minister's speech about the need for dispute resolution in a faster manner. So those are some of the things which I feel are very positive, besides, of course, all the investment. And the negative I feel is that there was no specific address to the urban poor or the urban, unorganized sector people, or particularly self-employed people. While there is a Manrega for the rural, probably there was a need for some opportunity for the urban poor. So that I found missing.
Before you go, would you like to attempt a rating? Rate the budget 1 to 10?
Well, that's a difficult one, so I'll give it a pass.
You pass. Okay. All right. Anshuman Magazine is with us. Thanks very much indeed, Harsh Neotia. Anshuman Magazine with us, Deputy Chairman CII Northern Region and also Chairman and CEO of CBRE, which is, of course, the real estate realty firm. Anshuman Magazine, do you want to begin with a rating, or are you also going to play it safe?
Every year I do the rating. This time I'd like to pass because the problem is it's too early. I just realized every year that when you read the fine print, your rating may change. But you
can always revise your rating if you want. So it's like revised, like with the budget, you have revised estimates and then you have the budget estimates.
I would give
but I'm just joking. Sorry. Yes. Go.
If you really insist, I would give it a 7 rating, which with the caveat that it may go down or maybe after I read the fine print.
Oh, okay, fine. That's your BE, your budget estimate. You can have your revised estimate after you go through the fine print, which we also, by the way, I'm stuck in studio, so I also want to go through the fine print. But okay, so Anshuman Magazine, broadly the same question as I asked Harsh Neotia. What would you say is one big positive for you in this budget, and what would be one negative or area of worry?
I think actually giving one positive, I would say one big positive is some of the indications. For example, talking about digitization of land records, registration. Now, this seems like a very small thing, but can you imagine if you look at today's litigation, what is happening in the country across India, and we talk about thousands of court cases that start in the whole system. The maximum number of cases are on land litigation.
So.
Right?
But just a quick question, of course, that's a great thing, digitization of land records, but isn't that been an ongoing thing? I mean, it's not a new thing.
I'm just going to let me finish on that. It's just that that and also on registration of land records across India anyway. Now, this sounds great. The challenge is it's a state subject and it needs to be implemented. So my point was, if they at least talked about it, if this is implemented, it will have a massive, bigger impact than people can imagine. One is, of course, ease of doing business, etc. The bigger thing is investment coming in. I think this is one of the biggest deterrents for investment to real estate and in parts of infrastructure, both domestic capital and international capital. It will make such a big difference that if this is really implemented and huge money will come in. So if it is implemented, again, is this an announcement right now? So I'm pleased that at least it's been highlighted. Now, if it gets implemented, it'll have a major impact. And the other one, there's a long list, but very quickly on data centers. Now, this is again a huge opportunity for our country. It's been given infrastructure status. It's a good start that should encourage, easier funding there. And one other area, of course, I would talk about is that urbanization and focus on tier 2, tier 3 cities and talking about modernization of routes there. But more importantly, one thing which again has not been highlighted earlier is that capacity building at the government. So a lot of the big schemes which are announced by the government, one of the reasons, there are many others, where they're not implemented is because the government doesn't have capacity to implement. So that capacity building and 5 center of excellence they talked about. So these are 2-3 things which are different from the previous budgets, which I have not seen looking at budgets for many, many
and
years.
an area of worry or where you felt that the budget didn't do enough?
Worry, more than worry, I would say disappointment that there could be more incentives given for people to invest in housing. As you know, construction is I would say, after agriculture, the largest employer. Employment is a huge topic. And I think more could have been done to give incentives to home buyers, which would have, had its own multiplier impact on the economy. One of the things, I mean, there are others, but this is the major one, tax incentives.
Okay, that's something which you felt was missing. And also, just in terms of Anshuman, because one of the things which people have pointed out is that while again consistency is good and all of that, but what's the new or the big announcement that's different from the past? Of course, there's now a tax on cryptocurrency. I don't know if that's necessarily considered like a new initiative, but is there anything that jumped out at you as a kind of a big new announcement or shift or direction?
Again, few things like, which seem small, but they're not. For example, the construction industry, which is again a major employer, like I mentioned. One of the asks they had was that when they're bidding for construction contracts with the government, which is the biggest, where the investment comes into construction, they have to give these bank guarantees. So the budget has announced that now they can give security. Now you have to, instead of giving bank guarantees. So the cost for the construction companies would come down, but then again you have to read the fine print. There was a talk about special economic zones. There will be a policy. Now, special economic zone, if you look at the total exports out of them, had marginally declined last year. So September, the budget is announced that they will come with a special economic zone policy. I think that should be very interesting. If they come up, this could make a big difference to our country. And no doubt, I would say, again, on the infrastructure side, there is continuity. But at the same time, talking about multimodal logistics, I think logistics was a major part, which I would see that it's been talked about before, but there's more emphasis in the budget right now. Logistics industry, again, has gone through, I would use the word boom, in this case, since last 2 years. And we continue to see that happening for next 1 or 2 years. So the budget mentioning about logistics, I think will make a big difference to the economy.
Okay, all right. Well, let's see. As I said, it's still a kind of work in progress. We're all still reading and assessing and reviewing our own assessment of it. But thanks very much indeed, Anshuman Magazine, for joining us.